Hi, everybody. Thanks for giving me time to share after I started. Hey, Dolores. Hey, Lana. Hey, Kay. Hey, Jim. Hey, Steve. And Michael D. Turding. Nice to see you. And hi, Dolores. Hi, Susan. Hi, Cora. Hope everybody is well tonight. I see that I've forgotten to include my links for tonight, so I'll do that a bit later. But there seems to be a little confusion. About what the CARES Act actually did. Of course, some in the mainstream, okay, are billing it as a bailout for working people. Of course, that's not the way the alternative media, okay, are looking at it. And I'm a part of the alternative media, and I very often agree with a lot of the other folks who are here. And I certainly agree in this case, uh, from the standpoint of what the act actually does for working people. It seems to me to be very inadequate. Okay, very inadequate. On the other hand, uh, okay, it does do something, not enough for small business. And of course, it does quite a lot for big business, for large corporations, and for the people who run them. Now, how does that happen? In other words, you can take a look at the bill and the various parts of it, and you can notice that, well, only 500 billion is going to big business, and something less than that, okay, a little less than that, is going to what's being called a slush fund that will be used by the administration and by the president and especially by the secretary of the treasury to give very low interest loans to large companies, okay, and large corporations. And we're going to go into exactly what that means and why it is so egregious and why it is very much against the interests of working people and small business people, and why it was in no way a bailout of the economy with respect to the coronavirus, but in fact a giveaway to these big businesses, which are not in trouble yet, except, of course, for the airlines. They are immediately in trouble. But there was a portion of that that was going to go to them, that is going to go to them. And that is not the portion that is being devoted to the slush fund. So we're going to go into the details of what this slush fund thing is actually about in just a minute. But first, I want to make sure that everybody knows that this bill does not provide for any treatment people have to undergo for the coronavirus if it turns out they have it. There's not a dollar in there for treatment expenses. Now, there is a direct payment that's supposed to go to individuals, and that payment is supposed to be $1,200 per person. If you're living in a two-person family, there would be $2,400 for a two-person family. If the two-person family has children, let's say 2 children, it would be $500 per child. So that family of 4 would be getting a direct payment of $3,400 from the federal government. That much is clear. Now, when they would be getting that payment is not so clear. Okay, if individuals had direct deposit arrangements with the IRS, then the payment would probably be coming to them pretty quickly. What we're hearing now is maybe within 3 weeks they will have the check. Of course, they really needed a check by April 1st, which is only 3 days from now. So 3 weeks is certainly not as good, and they've got to put off their landlords and people demanding current payments until then. So immediately we see it's not what people actually needed. Not quite what they needed. Excuse me a second, I'm about to sneeze. Thank you. For waiting. So that's going to be coming out as a result of the bill. Now, there's something like, I believe it's 80 million Americans or 75 million Americans who have their deposit information on file with the Treasury. And so they're going to get it in maybe 3 weeks. For the rest of us, it's going to take longer. Thank you, Lana. Thank you, Cora. Okay, for the rest of us, it's going to take longer. We don't know how much longer. It may take them a month to catch up with us. It might take them 2 months to catch up with us. If we're kinds of individuals who are moving from place to place, who don't have specific addresses that are easy to trace down, or things like that, it may take up to 4 months to get them this payment, which of course they need right now. That's a bad part of this bill. How might it have been avoided? We'll get into that in just a little while when we'll be talking about where we have to go from here. But the point is, the payment arrangements that were written into this bill by the mainstream are inadequate. Don't show a lot of imagination. Don't show much care for the working class. And don't do the job of getting people the money they need immediately. Now, there's another provision of the bill which is much better, though it still takes time to get money to people. If people have been laid off their jobs, if they've been laid off their jobs and have to go to unemployment in place of wages, then there is an improvement in their situation over a standard kind of unemployment insurance type of situation. Specifically, once they register for unemployment, once they get into the system, which I think probably takes about 2 weeks or so, or something like that. I seem to remember that from the last time I was unemployed. But, to be very clear about that, all kinds of people, huge numbers of people are going to be doing it. And there's a question about whether the state systems will be able to keep up. But anyway, once you're registered for unemployment and you're in the system and they're processing you for payment, then currently the average unemployment provision across the United States is roughly $300 per week. What the CARES Act actually includes, okay, is a bonus payment, essentially, for as long as the coronavirus is considered to be an emergency situation by the federal government. Let's say that situation lasts for 4 months. Oh, my camera appears. Okay, I'm back. I'm sorry about that. I don't know what caused the disconnection, but it does happen, as you may have noticed in past live streams. Though these seem to be very clear and of high quality, the feed is dropping off still, even though I'm directly cabled to the internet and have a high-speed connection as well. So, where was I when I was so rudely interrupted? So, the bonus payment lasts for 4 months, and it's $600 a week to be added to what you normally get. So if you normally get the average of $300 a week, you would be getting $900 a week, which is a decent amount on a monthly basis. 4.3 days per month. So what does that come down to? To something like $4,000 a month. That would be coming in for 4 months. That will replace a good deal of a person's salary, okay, of the wages, okay, that many people earn. Far from all people, however, okay, but many people earn, the average person earns. Okay, and it will do that to a pretty healthy extent. So that's a good feature of the bill. Having that actually written into the bill probably had to do with Bernie Sanders' influence. I think he was very, very forthright on that. And I think that he fought for that, of course. And he also fought for the idea that poor people were not to get any less, not in terms of unemployment and not in terms of a direct payment either. So that covers the good parts of the bill. I shouldn't say it completely covers the good parts of the bill. There's also $350 billion, if I recall correctly, for small business loans. Such small business loans would be forgiven also if the loan money is used for business expenses such as rent and such as payroll, things that actually keep the business open, even if there are no customers. In other words, these loans would be for keeping the businesses open in place, okay, and operating at some degree, okay, of activity, and keeping the employees paid. And there's $350 billion for that. I have no idea whether that's enough. I would feel a lot more capable, I would feel a lot more comfortable, I should say, if there had been 700 billion which was allocated for that. But that's as it may be, okay, or even more. And the more comes in when we talk about the $500 billion. The $500 billion. Oh, I should also mention there's 130 billion in for hospitals, for equipment and other expenses, okay, of hospitals. That probably is not enough, but it's quite a bit over what people were talking about before, okay, until about a week ago. It is going to help. I think more money is going to have to go to hospitals to keep them open, or to open some hospitals again, or to get some temporary hospitals open, and to take care of the equipment that everybody is going to need. So that's an important piece of the bill. Another important piece of the bill is $150 billion for state and local governments. And that's good because the tax revenues of state and local governments that keep it open are going to be crashing. And that $150 will help them a lot. Okay, I don't know if that's enough. I suspect maybe the correct figure would be more like 300 billion or 350 billion. But there is also $500 billion that is in the bill for other purposes. And what I'm going to do now is share the stream, share my screen. And show you an article from the American Prospect. Each day there's basically an update to the situation dealing with the Federal Reserve, and this article is by Dave Dayen, David Dayen, and it was updated on March 27th. I think the original version, was published earlier, but it was updated on the 27th. It's called Unsanitized, the Federal Reserve Loads the Cannon, plus the value, of unions. And this is the COVID-19 daily report from March 27, 2020. That was Friday. I wasn't able to give you a daily report on Friday because I was off on that day. But what Dave focuses on, in this article is 454 billion included in the bill for the Treasury Department to hand over to the Federal Reserve. And he puts in parentheses, this was initially 425 billion, but they topped it up in the final bill. That money could then be placed into a credit facility and levered up 10 to 1, creating a $4.5 trillion money cannon aimed at the largest corporations in America. And he says, you're right to ask, why does the Federal Reserve need any money from the Treasury, quote unquote? The Fed has a printing press, a computer really, and can conjure up whatever cash it needs. But Nathan Tankis, a very well-known guy in the MMT area, calls this an accounting gimmick. And if 1/4 of the total package is unnecessary, says Dave, that should be news. Well, what do they mean by that? Well, first of all, 454 billion is close to 1/4, okay, of the package. What's it for? It's to give the Federal Reserve money to back up this huge credit line that they want to give to the large corporations. Now, the Fed can create the money, can create $4.5 trillion worth of money for the large corporations without anything to back it. So why do they have the $454 billion? Because the Treasury realizes, or I'm sorry, the Federal Reserve realizes that the $4.5 trillion of money that's going out in loans may not all be repaid. The investments by the big corporations may not be very good, and a percentage of them may fail, and the Fed may not get its loan money back. It wanted the $454 billion to absorb the losses so that the balance sheet of the Federal Reserve would not be hurt. So this is not just an accounting gimmick. It's for absorbing the losses because the Fed's going to lend money to them. And the Fed didn't want its own balance sheet to be hurt. And it also didn't want to give, it didn't want to give the loan facility to the large corporations that was unbacked, because the only way it could do that, the only way it would be able to do that, would be to swap assets with the large corporations. Okay, and the people pushing this bill through did not want to put any of the assets of the large corporations at risk. It wanted to give them a free ride with these loans. That's what the $454 billion is really for. It's to underwrite the losses that are likely to happen from the big corporations gambling with this credit facility. Sorry, I guess my mic is still working, but my camera has gone south. Okay. Sorry about that. My camera went south again, so I had to retrieve it. But to get back to the analysis here, let me double check to see my mic's all right. Yeah, the mic's fine. Okay. So, what Dave Dayen says, he points out, uh-oh, looks like the camera's gone south again. Well, I don't know why that happened, but looks like I'm back and the mic is back, so we're all right. So, Dave points out that Pam and Russ, his last name is Martins, say this enables the Fed to hide the credit facility off its balance sheet. Yes, that's what it's for, off its balance sheet. So no assets of the Fed prior to its giving out those loans would be at risk. Making it a special purpose vehicle could shield the money cannon from freedom of information requests. Bloomberg famously used FOIA to discover the terrible collateral the Fed allowed banks and other companies to use for lending in the 2008 bailout. So, the people who put in this 454 billion didn't want to have the Congress doing that. In other words, it didn't want to have a situation where Freedom of Information Act requests, where reporters would be able to discover the terrible collateral, the lousy decisions made by the Treasury Department. In addition, the coronavirus bailout laws repeals public meeting and record-keeping requirements for Fed-related programs. That's what Bernie fought so hard for, okay, in previous years, right? And got for a limited amount of time. And the oversight built into the bill comes after the money is out the door. That is, the oversight is this committee that's supposed to be chaired by somebody and maybe staffed by Congress or by people Congress appoints. And they were supposed to provide, okay, an oversight for the Treasury Department. You'll see that this oversight thing is not going to work, even though, okay, it's in the bill. The oversight was ineffectual during the 2008 bailout. After the 2008 bailout, the oversight was a joke, even though they had the same instrumentality in. Now, supposedly, that part of the bill was written with the assistance of Senator Ryan. If so, she didn't do a very good job of writing oversight into this bill. We'll see why and how it was junked in just a little while. Okay. Oh, God. A lot of trouble tonight. I think my sound is back, isn't it? Sorry for the interruptions, but there seems very little I can do about that. I seem to be at the mercy of the internet when it comes to that. If the camera goes away, I'm just going to go on with the analysis for a while, okay, if it goes away again. So please excuse me, and I'll come back in when it's convenient to come back in. But as long as you can hear me, I can go on with the analysis. I don't think you need to see my face. Of course, you'll miss the expressions, but so the oversight built into the bill comes after the money is out the door. So secrecy, long a Fed staple, could be the answer. It could be the answer to journalists making FOIA requests and discovering the terrible collateral and the misbehavior of the Treasury Secretary, who, of course, would have Donald Trump standing behind him, wanting to use this credit facility at the Fed for all manner of purposes. Who knows what purposes? It's a $4.5 trillion loan facility to be dispensed as patronage for the purposes of Donald Trump. It's giving Trump, this Congress, handed over to Donald Trump $4.5 trillion to dispense as he wishes, with very little oversight, but as we shall see shortly, actually with no oversight at all, not even after the fact, at least not necessarily after the fact. The Fed also announced another whole bailout program on Monday, which is a year ago in coronavirus time, and this was again supported by Treasury Department cash. This credit facility supports the corporate bond market, which has been seizing up. Here's the situation. Lots of companies feasted on highly leveraged loans in the last 10 years. This was particularly true in the energy sector. And the current crash in commodities is likely to create a lot of defaults. Other debt, like commercial real estate, could collapse as well. Think of this Fed program as like a bank. Treasury makes a deposit, and that's the capital for lending and trading. Not by Treasury, but by others. For lending and trading for Donald Trump's purposes by the Secretary of the Treasury and his advisors. By buying up corporate debt, the Fed would keep corporate bond interest rates from spiraling up. The debt could be rated pretty low by credit rating agencies, meaning they think there's a likelihood of default. Since the rating agencies are reassessing these bonds, the Fed can scoop in before the downgrades to junk status. So many of these loans were overrated. Moody's highly rated a debt instrument on two large Las Vegas casinos on March 5th, when the effects of COVID-19 on the travel sector were already well known. That deal has already disintegrated. This is a bailout, then, of a highly irresponsible bonanza of corporate lending. All of this debt was run up well before any coronavirus crisis. And Dave Dayen asks, what is the rationale that the Fed has to backstop this market? Plus, the Fed already has the $4.5 trillion bazooka. Why do they also need a program to buy up increasingly worthless corporate debt? Well, you know why. We can't have their donors losing a bunch of money, can we? Incredibly, the Fed put BlackRock, the world's largest asset manager, in charge of this and two other bond buying programs. One of the programs involves buying up exchange-traded funds, and nobody has issued more of those than BlackRock. The firm can theoretically direct itself to buy up its own troubled funds and take fees on it. Whatever the purchase is, BlackRock unquestionably stands to make hundreds of billions of dollars on this particular deal. So, let us go a little further along this track. There was an article that appeared in Common Dreams by John Kelly. I think it's pronounced Kelly, Queally. That was written on March 26. It's called Era of Blank Checks for Corporations Needs to End. House Dems urge to remove the $500 billion Mnuchin-controlled slush fund. This was done before the passage of the bill. Of course, it was a last-ditch demand, which fell on deaf ears. Okay, of course, but the sentiment is correct and is correct for us going forward. Era of blank checks for corporations needs to end. And that's what Mnuchin and Trump got here. Exactly that. A blank check. And quote from Morris Pearl, chair of the Patriotic Millionaires and a former managing director at BlackRock, had this to say, quote, though Senate Democrats have said they successfully negotiated adequate oversight for this money, I have a different definition, okay, of adequate. Under the bill as it stands, said Morris Pearl, quote, but Secretary Mnuchin would have nearly free rein to use that $500 billion to bail out any corporation he pleases, with almost no conditions, and would merely have to make himself available to testify before Congress on those decisions after the fact, when he'll be gone. He might be gone, may not even be Secretary of the Treasury anymore. He may have gone back to Goldman Sachs to make piles and piles of money. He might even make big loans to Goldman Sachs for all kinds of mischief. And then go back to Goldman Sachs and make all kinds of money on the deals he did. I mean, this is totally corrupt, people. Totally corrupt. While progressive tax policy groups like Americans for Tax Fairness acknowledged that Democrat-led changes made it far more family and worker-friendly, the overall balance of the Senate package still favors corporate and business interests, especially big business interests, because that $4.6 trillion loan facility dwarfs any help that people are getting from this bill. People, workers, small businesses, they're all shortchanged. The bill was an excuse to bail out big businesses that don't yet need any help, before the people and the small businesses, which employ most of the people after all, have been getting taken care of. And here, this other article, did I share it, by the way? Let me double check and see if I shared it. I guess I didn't share the screen, so I'll share it now so you get some of the impact of this. There is a little bit of impact here because there's a graphic. And the graphic says, it's a pie chart. And it shows you graphically what part of the pie went to aid to workers and families. That's the blue part. There's a little bit for the safety net, a little SNAP support. And the green part is aid to state and local governments and healthcare providers, and education. The other is for other. I am not sure what other is exactly. The red part is for business tax cuts. And then the biggest part of it is aid to corporations and small businesses. That's the biggest part, okay, of this bill. But that doesn't count. That doesn't count that loan facility. That's just the breakdown of the $2.3 trillion in total funding that was allotted from the bill. That doesn't include the loan facility. So this is really bad. This is really a giveaway. Now, it was obvious that some of the warriors on the progressive side were very, very unhappy about this. Very, very unhappy about it indeed. Bernie Sanders made a speech against it on the floor without seeming to realize, however, that this $4.5 trillion loan facility was going to exist. He didn't seem to know that because he talked about this as being a $500 billion bailout for the large corporations. So I'm not sure that when he made his famous floor speech on this now, which was very effective, of course, I'm not sure he was aware that he wasn't talking about a $500 billion bailout. He was talking about a $4.5 trillion bailout. I don't know if Bernie knew this when he made the floor speech. If he had known it, he might have risked holding up this bill, because that's the really ridiculous part of this bill. I think Ocasio-Cortez, though, knew about it when she made her 30-second statement on the floor, because by then she had probably talked to Dave Dayen or maybe Matt Stoller or maybe other people who were watching this very, very carefully. There's another article that appeared in Common Dreams on March 28th, today. And the headline of it, it was by Owen Higgins, is "Far more to do, say progressives, after House approves and Trump signs corporate-friendly Coronavirus Relief Act." Terribly misnamed. The CARES, Coronavirus Aid, Relief, and Economic Security Act. That's baloney sausage. It was the Big Corporation Economic Security Act. That's what it is, with a few pennies thrown to working families. But still, the progressives would not vote against it. Why? Well, Mark Pocan gives an indication. What Mark says is hang on a second, I'm going to share my screen again. Okay, you can't see me, but you can see the screen sharing. I'll come back in a while. You might as well see this on the whole screen, as long as my mic is working, which I believe it is. So, there was a tweet from the co-chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus, which is Mr. Pocan, Mark Pocan. He tweeted, "We just passed a necessary relief package for working families." He says, of course, in the way of the Washington people, it's not perfect. We know that, but we're not done. He might have became more honest and said, "This is a terrible bill, but we need to get money at the people, so we're going to vote for it anyway. We know that, but we're not done. We're not finished. We're going to do more. But we need to get some money out to you post-haste. That's why we're voting for this bill, which has one very, very terrible part that we're going to have to do something about, but that's going to have to be later. And this article basically goes through what I've already told you about what's in the bill. Ilhan Omar says, I rise in support of this bill, not because it's perfect or even sufficient, but because the lives and livelihoods of millions of Americans are at risk, which is why she supported it. Okay, Ocasio-Cortez was the one who made the most truthful but unkindest comments about the bill, because she talked about the slush fund that was going to provide a huge credit line for the large corporations. You probably saw that she was given all of 30 seconds to make a statement, but she made the most of that 30 seconds. Anyway, Pramila Jayapal, the other co-chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus, said she and her colleagues were focused on the next step. We're already at work immediately on the next package to ensure it includes provisions we fought for but did not get this time. She said this is a crisis of epic proportions. We must continue to do everything we can to respond with the scale sufficient to meet the suffering of people across our country. And there were other statements about basically working for the future, statements which I agree with. However, you should be getting a black screen now because let me see, I stopped sharing the screen. Yes, I have stopped sharing the screen. Let me take this opportunity to try to restart my camera. It is also true, it's also true that it doesn't fill the needs of people. And the credit facility is not just bad because it gives opportunities to corporations, but what makes it a cannon is not that it's aimed at shooting money at corporations. What makes it a cannon is that it provides corporations who get those loans to fire at smaller companies that are in distress due to the coronavirus crisis, and to buy up those smaller companies and to consolidate the oligarchy. That's what that credit line facility is really about. It's about providing the opportunity to further concentrate business, further increase the inequality we face, further strengthen the political influence of the corporations and the oligarchy. That's what this part of the bill was really about. And the Congress did it. The Republicans did it with the assistance of the Democrats under cover of the coronavirus crisis. Instead of just doing things to meet the crisis and help with the crisis and help with its effects on the economy, instead of voting an adequate amount of money for the hospitals, which got only $130 billion, instead of voting an adequate amount of money for the state governments, whose tax revenues are collapsing, instead of voting an adequate amount of money to keep the small businesses in business and people employed, instead of all those things, $454 billion was used to back a no-risk credit line for the large corporations to consolidate their hold on the economy. That's how corrupt this was. Now let's be clear. Well, everybody says let's be clear. That's a baloney sausage. We don't want to talk that kind of baloney. Sorry about that. Okay. I always try to be clear, so I don't have to say let's be clear. I may not always be clear, but I always try to be. So take that as a given. The point being that these people, the people running the show in Washington, Mitch McConnell, Chuck Schumer, Nancy Pelosi's whole leadership team, they all have to go because they're about turning America into an oligarchy, into a plutocracy. That is what they do. Anytime there's a crisis of any kind, financial or even disease like this, they play shock doctrine with us. They never waste a crisis. Not to make things better, not to use the crisis to make things better, to restructure the polity, to restructure the economy, to heal the inequality, to save people's lives. They never do it for that. When they say they never waste a crisis, what that means is they never waste a chance to strengthen the oligarchy more. That's what they were about. That's what this was about. There wouldn't have been anything lost if the $454 billion was never appropriated in this bill. The $454 billion didn't do a thing for most people, didn't do a thing for us. The other part of the $500 billion went to the airlines so that they could stay in business, so their people could stay paid. We needed that. That part's okay. Those people need to be protected. That union needs to be protected. And our ability to have airlines also needs to be protected. So that was legitimate. But the other $454 billion was not needed. But the point I really want to make here is that it's not about the Republicans versus the Democrats. It's about Republicans who serve the oligarchy and Democrats who serve the oligarchy. They all have to go, or we will never have the country we need. We will never have the nation we need. They need to be retired. And that includes Joe Biden, of course. He's part of them. He's one of them. Of course. These are the people who are killing Americans every year by failing to pass a Medicare for All bill. The failure to pass a Medicare for All bill is killing many thousands unnecessarily every year and has been doing so Look at what's happening with this coronavirus crisis. When people started feeling ill, they didn't want to go to the doctor. When they went to the doctor, it was too late. We didn't even find out about those cases. It wasn't just about the testing. It was about people unwilling to go to the doctor because they didn't want to pay the copays or the deductibles, or they didn't have insurance in the first place. So they stayed in the population and they gave the disease to the rest of us. They circulated the disease. That wouldn't have happened if we'd had a Medicare for All bill. When could we have had a Medicare for All bill? Well, we could have had one a long, long time ago. John Conyers introduced H.R. 676, if I recall correctly, back in 2003. It was that far back. But certainly when Barack Obama was elected president and originally came into office in 2009, he had enough of a majority in the Senate, and Nancy Pelosi had a huge majority in the House, that if Barack Obama had wanted to, he could have passed H.R. 676 right then and there, and we would have had Medicare for All in 2009. We could have had it in February of 2009. With a schedule to be made effective within 6 months by the fall of 2009. If the Democrats had passed an appropriately large stimulus bill of, let's say, $1.8 trillion instead of the feeble Recovery Act that they passed, and if they had passed a Medicare for All bill in 2009, they would have been heroes in 2010. They never would have lost control to the Republicans. But they didn't care about that. They cared more about saving the insurance companies. That's what the whole healthcare struggle was about. It was about, well, let's do the minimum for the American people, but save the insurance companies, our big donors. That's what they wanted to do, and that is what they did, and Obama was very successful at it. But if he had passed it, the crisis we're going through now would have been far less serious. We would have been improving a Medicare for All program since that time, saving, by the way, huge amounts of money, which we're currently spending on the healthcare sector of the economy that could have gone to other sectors, that could have gone to research on how to contain epidemics and pandemics. Under Obama and under Trump, the budget for the Center for Disease Control has contracted from $12 billion per year to $8 billion per year. The CDC has been short-handed. It's been getting starved of resources by Congress and the executive branch because neoliberals were in control of both parties, following the ideology of neoliberalism, which is about starving the beast. Now, we associate starving the beast with Ronald Reagan. But it wasn't only Ronald Reagan. Nancy Pelosi's been playing ball with them since she got into the Congress. She styled herself as a progressive. She was a founding member of the Congressional Progressive Caucus, for God's sake. But she was only socially progressive. She was never economically progressive. She was about reducing deficits from the beginning, about austerity from the beginning. In the period when she was just the leader of the party and not the Speaker of the House, she's been going to Peter G. Peterson fiscal summit conferences where she gives speeches that sound very little different about what should be done about the budget from Kevin McCarthy. From Kevin McCarthy, spouting exactly the same philosophy as Kevin McCarthy and Peter G. Peterson before he died, and Michael Peterson, the current head of the Peter G. Peterson Foundation. She would go to their summits. First, they had Bill Clinton at the first 4 summits. Then they needed somebody else top drawer from the Democratic Party. Who did they get? Nancy Pelosi, of course, because she agreed with them. When it comes to fiscal stuff, there's not a hair's breadth of difference between Nancy Pelosi and Kevin McCarthy. When it comes to international trade, there wasn't a hair's breadth of difference between the two of them. They were and are corrupt neoliberals. And they've been killing people with their policies for years. And this was no different, under cover of a bailout bill for the middle class and for working people. They put in an unnecessary corporate bailout, creating a loan facility of $4.6 trillion for the oligarchs to feather their nest. That's what this has been about. Okay, so there's one other thing I want to note, and then I want to get into where we go from here. There was an article that appeared in The Intercept by one of our very favorite people, Stephanie Kelton. Namely, Stephanie Kelton. And let me share the screen. Hopefully my camera's not going to go off again just because I share the screen, but who knows. I think you can see both me and the article. Yes, good. Good for the time being. So this appeared in The Intercept on Friday, and it says, as Congress pushes a $2 trillion stimulus package, the, quote, how will you pay for it, unquote, question is tossed in the trash. I don't know if it was tossed in the trash. It was just never, what? How will you pay for it? Why didn't Bernie Sanders ask them how they were going to pay for it? Anyway, Stephanie talks about how in the Democratic primary, everybody asked how you're going to pay for it every chance they got. And she says about the bill, okay, the legislation, the act, details of the legislation, particularly the $500 billion strings optional corporate slush fund, may be shameful, as Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, who represents the hardest hit neighborhood of Queens, deemed on the House floor Friday morning. But the moment is instructive. Last week, as it became clear that concerns about deficits and revenue had evaporated, Ocasio-Cortez joined Sanders for a virtual town hall to discuss the global pandemic and the unfolding economic question. She raised a number of important points, but one observation touched an especially strong nerve with me. She was talking about the speed with which the House and Senate have been working to pass spending bills to get cash into the hands of desperate workers, struggling businesses, and major industries. And here Stephanie quotes from Ocasio-Cortez. It's a fascinating progressive movement because what it's shown is that all of these issues have never been about, quote, how are you going to pay for it, unquote. It's never been about whether we have the capacity to do these things or if the logistics have worked out. All of these excuses that we have been given as to why we cannot treat people humanely have suddenly gone up in smoke, and what has been revealed is that all these issues were really about a lack of political will and who you deemed worthy to be in an emergency or not. And Stephanie points out she, meaning Ocasio-Cortez, is outraged, and she should be. Congress has ignored millions of people who have existed in a state of crisis for decades. The people of Flint, Michigan, and elsewhere still do not have safe drinking water. Millions of kids go hungry each day. 500,000 before the pandemic were homeless on any given night, and on it goes. There has been no multi-trillion-dollar spending bill to combat these and other domestic emergencies. Instead, lawmakers have deprived communities of critical investments that could have attenuated their emergencies, often hiding behind the excuse there isn't enough money in the budget to deal with problems like these. And Stephanie says the Congresswoman wants everyone to learn what the federal response to the pandemic is teaching us, because the coronavirus is a threat to all of us, not just the poor, who are choosing to act in ways we always could have acted. And she says, how was Congress able to come up with $2 trillion so quickly? Why wasn't there a knockdown, drag-out fight about how to pay for this multi-trillion-dollar bill? Where is the money coming from? Let's get to the bottom of this. And she says, first, it's important to understand what it means to say that Congress is, quote, paying for, unquote, its spending. She says, I served as chief economist for the Democrats on the U.S. Senate Budget Committee from 2015 to 16. That is, Bernie Sanders was chairing the committee, at that time, and was the ranking member after the Republicans took over the committee. It's important to understand that those words have a specific meaning in the budget world. When a member of Congress drafts a bill, staffers often shop it around looking for support from other members. Inevitably, the first question a staffer is confronted with is, quote, what is your pay for, unquote. For example, suppose a staffer is shopping around a $1 trillion infrastructure bill. Before lending support to the bill, everyone wants to know how the spending is going to be, quote, paid for, unquote. What that means in budget speak is, quote, how are you going to fully offset the spending so that it doesn't add to the deficit, unquote. That's what it means to pay for your spending, says Stephanie. And she says this usually involves raising taxes, though it can be also done by carving money out of some other part of the budget, e.g. defense. We did this with the $1 trillion infrastructure bill when I was in the Senate. Now, that bill never did pass, by the way. Our so-called pay-for involved closing tax loopholes that mainly benefit wealthy individuals and large profitable corporations. Lots of people were eager to do an infrastructure bill, but we couldn't get enough support for the tax increase, so the bill didn't pass. Suppose it had. When Congress passes a spending bill that is fully paid for, it sends two sets of instructions to the Federal Reserve. The Fed is the government's fiscal agency, i.e. its bank, and virtually all payments made by and to the federal government are handled by the Fed. That's right. The first set of instructions, she's saying, the first set of instructions from the Congress tells the Fed to make certain authorized payments on behalf of the Treasury. And she says, the Fed makes these payments by using a computer to add dollars to bank accounts. Okay, so I don't agree with these two sentences, quite. I don't see any instructions in the bill that tell the Fed, in so many words, to make authorize payments on behalf of the Treasury. What I see in appropriations bills are specific amounts that it is mandated for the Treasury to spend. Now, it's true, the Fed makes payments in accordance with this mandate by using the computer to add dollars to bank accounts. But there's a prior question here. And the prior question here is, if there's not enough money in the Treasury spending account to make these payments, how is the Treasury spending account topped up? How do reserves get added to the Treasury spending account? Right now, they only get added in consequence of the process of settlement of Treasury security auctions, or in settlement of tax payments to the Treasury that are made by other entities. Those are the two main things that the Fed takes as business rule preconditions to add dollars to the Treasury spending account. Now, it's rightly pointed out, and Stephanie showed this in some of her basic research, it's rightly pointed out that the payments to Treasury from the sale of Treasury securities and from tax payments never get into the Treasury spending account. So they never actually pay for anything. But what they do is trigger the Fed to make additions to the Treasury spending account so the Treasury can make its payments that have been mandated by Congress. So the Treasury can do its mandated spending. And the Fed does use a computer to add dollars to bank accounts, but it doesn't do this directly from instructions that are sent to the Fed by the Congress. It does this when the Treasury sends instructions to the Fed to pay particular bills or to make certain payments to people. Just in terms of the bill that has just been passed, the bailout bill. Why is it going to take so long? Why will it take so long to get money to people? Because Treasury has to send instructions to the Fed to send money to particular people. We talked about the Treasury having on file direct deposit coordinates for 80 million people that are going to speed up their payments. That's because the Treasury is going to send instructions to the Fed to make payments to those deposit accounts. And then the Fed is going to use the computer to add dollars to the bank accounts. That step is not there in Stephanie's account. Anyway, going further. If we're doing a big infrastructure bill, then the government might be paying Caterpillar Incorporated for lots of new building equipment and hiring thousands of construction workers, architects, engineers, and so on. Government spending adds dollars to bank accounts. Absolutely, absolutely does. The second set of instructions tells the Fed to use the computer to subtract dollars from bank accounts. Well, again, no, it doesn't. What it does is there are tax filings that we all do These are due on April 15th. The tax filings don't go to the Fed, they go to the Treasury Department. But there are payments made. There are payments made that are sent to the Treasury Department. Those payments are settled by the Fed when it uses its computer to subtract dollars from the bank accounts of those who are paying their taxes. So that's where the subtractions come in. The subtractions come in as a result of the instructions sent by the taxpayers when they make their payments electronically to the Treasury Department. Or it can be that a taxpayer will send a check to the Treasury Department, and then the Treasury Department will deposit that check. And then the Fed will settle the payment and use its computer to subtract dollars from the bank accounts of the taxpayers. So, on balance, paying for its spending means the government instructs the Fed to subtract away via tax exactly as many dollars as it adds via spending to bank accounts. So this part is right, but it obscures some of the details of what is going on that's crucial to why we have debt ceiling crises. Because there are times when the Treasury is not able to cause the Fed to make additions to its account by selling debt instruments, because if it did sell debt instruments, it would go over the debt ceiling. Anyway, going further. That is not what Congress is doing today. Instead of writing a bill that would send two sets of instructions to the Fed, Congress is pushing through a $2 trillion spending bill that will send just one set of instructions. No one is bothering to try to offset, i.e. pay for that spending, because the goal is to get lots of money to people and companies without subtracting a lot of way. As Ocasio-Cortez correctly points out, Congress is doing now what it could always have done. Well, this is right. Okay, it's perfectly right, but it misses the point. It misses the point that what is likely to happen somewhere down the line is that as the Treasury begins to spend the money that Congress has appropriated, and it's going to spend that money from the Treasury balance that it has in its account right now. Somewhere along the line, it's going to need additions to its Treasury spending account to handle this expenditure that has not been offset by either taxes, or pay-fors that have come through selling Treasury securities. And then, if we don't see a difference of behavior on the part of the Treasury Department, what's likely to happen is that they will sell securities. They will sell securities in order to drain an equal amount of money. To drain, in other words, the $2 trillion that they have placed into the economy in order to take that out of the economy. However, there will still be left in the economy those debt securities. They will not be reserves, but there will be $2 trillion in net financial assets in the form of debt securities left in the economy that were not there before. That's what will happen if the Treasury Department does not change its normal behavior. So it's not that the traditional kinds of pay-fors will not happen. They still may. But they'll happen later with the sale of the Treasury securities. And then what's going to happen after that? Well, the likelihood is, unless we change behavior, the likelihood is that the rightists, the neoliberals, are going to start complaining about the size of the public debt again, which, of course, was tremendously increased by deficit spending of the $2.3 trillion. And they're going to start saying, oh, woe is us. We've increased the debt from $23 trillion to $26 trillion or $27 trillion, or whatever the hell it turns out to be. We got to do something about it. The debt burden is insupportable. The only thing we can do about the debt burden is to go out and get Social Security and privatize it. That's been the kind of move they've made in the past. That's what we have to expect in the future, unless we do something about it. Anyway, Stephanie goes on to talk about the limits of spending due to inflation. I'm not going to go over those here because they're not relevant to my points for tonight. She also points out that the government can't run out of money, but it can run out of things to buy, including labor. We are constrained by our real resources, our technical know-how, and the available supply of workers, factories, machines, raw materials, and so on. As long as the economy isn't already operating at full capacity, then it is reasonable for Congress to send just one set of instructions to the Fed. We could have done that with a number of things, the Democrats debated over the last year. For example, Sanders proposed we cancel $81 billion in medical debt. We could have easily done that without offsets. Oh, she's so right. It would have allowed people who were paying down medical bills to spend some or all of that money on other things. Even if they spent all of it buying consumer goods, the U.S. economy could easily have handled the additional spending. There was no reason to, quote, pay for, unquote, that kind of legislation because there was no chance it would have caused inflation to accelerate. The numbers were just too small. That's right, they were just too small. Even though they were $1.3 trillion, it wouldn't have caused inflation to accelerate one bit. But she said, but even bigger things could have been done for without so-called pay-fors. Take student debt. I'm sorry, I thought she was talking about student debt there. I missed that. What was she talking about again? She was talking about the cancellation, of medical debt. Now she's moving to student debts. And she's saying, but even bigger things could have been done without so-called pay-fors. Take student debt. Both Warren and Sanders wanted to cancel student loan debt. He would have canceled all of it, and she would have canceled up to $50,000 for 95% of the population. Both explained how it could be paid for. It could be paid for with increased taxation on the wealthy, is what they wanted to do. Long before any presidential candidate got behind the idea, I worked with a team of economists to analyze the macroeconomic effects of canceling what was then $1.4 trillion of student loan debt. I think it's $1.6 trillion now. What we found was that the economy had enough real resource capacity to safely handle a one-time cancellation without the need for offsets. In other words, Congress did not need to pay for it. That was a study done for the Levy Institute, and this article has a link to that study that was done by Stephanie and Scott Fulweiler and Marshall Steinbaum. And if I'm not mistaken, okay, there was another co-author. I think it was Pavlina Chernyeva. Anyway, I'll let you click on it and find out. Okay, it could be that Randy Ray was a co-author of it too. Anyway, that won't always be the case. It always comes down to inflation risk. How much can the economy handle in terms of higher spending before you need the offsets? That's the right way to think about the pay for question. It's also the right way to budget our nation's real resources. And then she goes on, and I'm just about ending with her article here. Even before the meltdown currently underway, there was enough slack in the economy to allow Congress to bring clean drinking water to the people of Flint, to beef up programs that provide nutritional assistance to children, and to build housing for those sleeping on the streets. Congress could have addressed these and other emergencies by passing spending bills without the need for so-called pay for. If the votes are there, the money can always be made available. When all of this is behind us, to the extent that it can ever be, let's not forget what we have learned. And I thought that was a very well taken article for the most part. So, I want to call your attention to one more article. It was published on March 28, 2020. And the title of it is Unacceptable. Dems fume after Trump announces plan to refuse congressional oversight of the corporate bailout the funds. So this article is about what Trump just said. Congress passes a bill with oversight in it, however inadequate the oversight is. And progressive lawmakers on Friday evening denounced Donald Trump's intention, his stated intention. He made a signing statement on this bill when he passed it. He stated his intention to disregard provisions in the just passed coronavirus relief bill that would provide crucial oversight of $500 billion in taxpayer money already poised to be a Wall Street slush fund. Katie Porter said this is unacceptable, and Trump made a signing statement. Section 4018, Division A of the Act establishes a new Special Inspector General for Pandemic Recovery within the Department of Treasury to manage audits and investigations of loans and investments made by Secretary of the Treasury under the Act. Section 4018E, 4B of the Act authorizes the SIGPR, that's the Inspector General for Pandemic Recovery, to request information from other government agencies and requires the SIGPR to report to the Congress without any delay of the judgment of the Special Inspector General. Any refusal of such a request that in the judgment of the Inspector General is unreasonable. So, the Inspector General is supposed to report to Congress any refusal of a request to supply that person with information. Okay. And Donald Trump said, I do not understand, and my administration will not treat but this provision as permitting, I'm trying to access what it says, as permitting the SIGPR to issue reports to the Congress without the presidential supervision required by the Take Care Clause, Article 2, Section 3. So Trump is saying, I think he's claiming that he's not going to do that. There are constitutional grounds for not doing it, that Congress exceeded its power in saying that there had to be a special inspector general inside the Department of Treasury. So he's already, as the law takes effect, he's already saying he's not going to comply with the oversight provisions of the law. So not only were their provisions completely adequate, but he's also not going to comply with the oversight provisions anyway. Right? Isn't that Mr. Trump? So much for the oversight provisions. I think what Congress ought to do is to say to the president, no oversight provisions, no slush fund. And I think what they ought to do now is to promptly repeal the part of the relief package that provides the $454 billion for the slush fund. Ocasio-Cortez says, and just like that, the congressional oversight provisions for the $500 billion Wall Street slush fund, which were already too weak, are tossed away the day the bill is signed. This is a frightening amount of money to have given a corrupt administration without accountability. It is. It is. Guess what Trump could do with that? He could provide a loan to private companies to build his wall. I mean, that would only take, what, 15, 20, maybe 30 billion out of the $4.5 trillion slush fund. Right? Congress won't even have to appropriate it. He could use it to have a private company build the wall. Now, maybe, maybe Mexico would knock the wall down then, since it's only a private company, but hell. Katie Porter went further, and she has a lot to say, about this, so I commend the article to you, and I will leave the link. But I wanted to make that point that oversight over the trust fund is already out the window. We didn't even have to wait as we waited in 2009. There was oversight like this. But in 2009, the president and the secretary at least had the decency to just try and get around the oversight, which they did very successfully. It wasn't really a problem for them. But Trump wouldn't even go through those motions. He just want to say, I'm not going to do it. You can't make me. Why? Because the only thing that can make Trump do things Congress wants him to do that he doesn't want to do is for Congress to impeach him and convict him. And the Republicans will not do that, of course. So Trump gets to be above the law and gets to do what he wants to do. So, this brings us to the topic of where we go from here, and I'm sorry to take so long to get here, but I thought it was important to go through all that stuff. So what do we need to do to get here? Well, progressives have said they're going back and they're working on the fourth bill. Now let's make sure they work on a bill that bails out people and not corpse. Okay? And let them put that bill to the Republicans. Let it be adopted by the House, and let the House put that bill to the Republican Senate and put that bill to Trump and dare them not to pass it. But don't compromise with them on it. Have to make Pelosi stand up for it. You have to make her understand there can be no dealing on this bill. There can only be the bill itself. And what bill should it be? What bill that we as a movement should call for? What bill should we ask Bernie Sanders to call for? The bill we should ask Bernie Sanders to call for is Rashida Tlaib's bill, the Automatic Boost to Communities Act, which we have already gone over here at some length. Not instead of the present bill. Let the present bill go on. Let the present bill do what it's going to do for people. But let's pass the Boost Act also. Now, the Boost Act would immediately provide a U.S. debit card preloaded with $2,000 to every person in America. Each card would be recharged with $1,000 monthly until 1 year after the end of the coronavirus crisis. We've already pointed out to a family of 4 that would provide $8,000 up front in a preloaded debit card. And $1,000 monthly thereafter until 1 year after the end of the crisis. Now, this would be in addition to the bill that was already passed. That would surely be enough money for people not to be economically hurt by this particular crisis. What's in the 2 bills combined would surely provide that. But let's talk about distributing the money, because that's critical, because you saw how with the CARES bill, it would take a while for the money to filter in to people who really need it now, who need it because the economy has collapsed. We're going into April, and these people won't have cash. People living hand to mouth, many Americans won't have cash. They're not able to pay rent. This bill needs to be rushed through as quickly as possible. The money would be distributed as U.S. debit cards and would be administered by the U.S. Treasury's Bureau of the Fiscal Service. These prepaid digital cash cards could be used to withdraw physical currency at regular ATMs or FDIC-insured banks or credit unions, or make payments at point-of-sale terminals as well as online. In addition, these cards could be topped up with additional funds as needed during and after the crisis. In other words, this bill establishes a payment structure from the federal government to handle not only this emergency, but other emergencies. All cardholder and interchange fees associated with the use of distributed cards would be waived for the duration of the coronavirus crisis. No fees for the duration of the crisis. The program would establish a common database of recipients identified by name and or, where available, employer identification numbers. Identifying information would not be shared with any other federal, state, or local agency. Or any individual who receives, activates, and uses more than the maximum number of cards authorized for themselves and their dependent, either as a result of fraud or administrative error, would have excess funds reclaimed in the future via taxes, via taxation. Cards would be distributed in 3 ways. Direct mail. All individuals with an active address on file with any government agency would have a card sent to them via the USPS. With any government agency, not just their direct deposit with the Treasury Department, with the IRS, with any government agency. with Social Security, with Medicare, with any other government agency. An address on file, individual gets sent a card. There would also be in-person pickups at post offices, banks, credit unions, and U.S. embassies overseas. There are people, of course, who are at risk. They're elderly, homeless, physically disabled, or live in remote areas. And there would be a dedicated emergency responder corps that would perform outreach to these populations to ensure they receive their debit cards and to simultaneously perform a general wellness check in case they need additional targeted assistance. That's the bill we should pass. It provides for funding the programs, not through issuing debt instruments, not through taxation, but through platinum coin seniorage. I'm not going to go through the mechanism for that. I'm leaving a link to the description of the bill, and you can read the process there. I covered it just a few streams ago, so you can get it from one of my streams, or you can get it from the bill. The point being, two $1 trillion platinum coins would be issued to fund this bill, which is going to cost roughly $2 trillion. And that would really be, passing this bill, would really be a bailout on a continuing basis for middle class and for working families and for individuals or families without any dependents, okay, any children, especially when we add that to the CARES Act. That would fix up the problem that the CARES Act was inadequate. This addition would make it adequate. So we need to go there. We need to pass the Rashida Tlaib bill. We need to pressure, okay, to get it passed. We can't allow them to ignore this bill. It's very important, not only for what it does for people, but also because it graphically illustrates the power of the federal government to create its own reserves at the Federal Reserve Bank necessary to pay for anything that's appropriated by Congress. Or instead of saying to pay for, to add reserves to the Treasury spending account, which can then be used to implement the appropriations, to pay for private sector things, with reserves sent to the private sector. So that needs to be done to start with. What also needs to be done is we need to pass similar bills, and I think these should just be separate bills, similar bills to make more money available for small businesses. Now, why not have this $350 billion more appropriated for small businesses to add to the original $350 billion, but take this $350 billion and establish a credit facility at the Federal Reserve Bank for small businesses and give small businesses accounts at the Federal Reserve Bank so that in this and future crises, it would be possible to get money to small businesses very, very quickly. through the Fed just marking up the small business accounts. So give them $350 billion more, and you can fund that with a single platinum coin if you want to. Then the Fed can turn that $350 billion coin into reserves that it can use to back a $3.5 trillion loan facility for small business. How about those apples for small business? Then how about also going back and doubling the allocation for hospitals so their expenses, are really covered? That's only another $150 billion. That's hardly stretching. $130 billion, I said. And then also add another $150 billion for state and local governments whose tax bases are collapsing. We need to have those things done too. They should be done in two separate acts, not mixed, but together. We can judge at that time when those acts are written whether we want to fund them with platinum coins or not, or some other instrumentality. But we got to fight for those things to be done too, because the CARES bill was not adequate for hospitals. It was not adequate for the devastation that's going to come to small businesses as a result of having to freeze the country. We're not going to get back out of the coronavirus by Easter. We'll be lucky if we get back by the end of June. We're going to have to kill the spread of this virus now so the hospitals can catch up in capacity, so they can handle treatments for people, so a huge number of people do not have to die. We need to lower the fatality rate on this. It can't even be 1%. 1% of the American population is 3.3 million people. We cannot have those many deaths from the coronavirus. Any government that tolerates that many deaths would be the biggest failure in American history. The biggest failure in American history. The government would be a neoliberal failure. The deaths have to be gotten down to a manageable level. I can't say exactly what that is, but we already lose close to 100,000 people to lack of insurance and to underinsurance each year in the healthcare system. I think this needs to be less than another 100,000. We have to do everything we can to get things down to that level. We need to create enough time so that at least the antivirals can get online and can be produced in sufficient quantities to help people who have to go to the hospital to cure themselves, or even to prevent people from having to go to the hospital. We need that time for the antivirals to come online. Then we need to speed up the vaccine so that it's ready to go and out in the spring of next year. So we have to break this curve now. China did it. We've surpassed them in the number of cases. They have something like 82,000 cases now in China. And they've had the problem for much longer than we. And they're a country whose population is 4 times the size of ours. But they contained the spread because they cared about their people. Are we going to say the Chinese leadership, those notorious authoritarians and totalitarians, cared about their countrymen more than the President of the United States and his administration care about their fellow Americans? Are we going to let it come to that? Or are we going to make this president care about his fellow Americans? Our performance in relation to this virus thus far has been shameful. It has been immoral. It has been wrong. We have to give people the wherewithal to shelter in place to the extent that is possible, to stay home, to protect their families and themselves until the hospital system can handle this. And we have to do whatever is necessary to get the federal government to listen and to do this. And by the way, in the face of what's happened, it is patently ridiculous that we don't have a Medicare for All bill now. There's one already introduced into the Congress. It's Pramila Jayapal's H.R. 1384 bill. It's a wonderful bill. It needs to be passed right now and to put into immediate effect as long as the coronavirus crisis lasts. And for my money, even beyond that. But there can be no waiting period. We're in the middle of a crisis right now. We've got to have that bill. People who need to have to be able to go to the doctor. People have to be able to get their tests. There can be no economic barrier to this. An economic barrier means people die because they don't go to the doctor because they can't afford it. They don't get tested and diagnosed. They don't get care until they're well along, making it harder to treat them. We can't have that right now. It's a danger to everybody. It's a danger to our whole communities. So, we need the Tla'i bill. We need to have small business funding greatly boosted to save the small businesses. We need our hospital resources coming out of the CARES Act to be doubled. We need the state and local governments to have much more money to handle the collapse of their tax revenues. And we need a Medicare for All bill now, not next year, not when and if Bernie Sanders gets into office in 2021. We need it now. We're in the middle of a crisis where Medicare for All is needed. We cannot wait for it anymore. It's got to be done. And Trump has got to hear over the web such a loud outcry about this that he never forgets it. We have to give them all such static about this. This is our lives. And we can't let them forget it. And we got to remind them, it's their lives too. This thing is catching. They can't protect themselves from it. If they go fly away somewhere, they'll get it on the plane. If they go cruise somewhere, they're going to get it on the boat. They're not going to be able to get away from it. Also, we have to have systems in place for the next one. And the Medicare for All bill will help to do that. And the infrastructure we set up to handle this emergency will establish the infrastructure we need to handle future crises as well. So none of this will be wasted. We need far more vigorous action, and we need action for the people and not action for the corporations. And finally, what do we do about the $454 billion slush fund? When these other measures are put through, we progressives have to return to that. And we have to pass a simple repeal bill for that slush fund. We have to defund the trust fund. We have to take the money back. I think we probably have to pass all these things over the next couple of months as soon as we get done. By July, we have to force the administration to get rid of that trust fund. We have to get a bill out of the House, and we have to dare the Senate to vote against it. Have to make it a political issue. And every Republican standing for office has to know if they vote against the repeal, they are standing with a slush fund for big business, and that a Democrat will be running against them on that basis. We have to get that bill out of the House, and we have to get the Democrats to run on that bill. And once it's passed, we have to say to the big corporate community, the big business community, if you can show you need a bailout and you're an essential industry, we will help you. We will bail you out. But there will be conditions. There will be conditions. And these conditions you will have to comply with these particular conditions. You will be able to get loans, but The Federal Reserve is going to administer those loans. And the Federal Reserve is going to decide whether you are creditworthy or not creditworthy. And the Federal Reserve is going to apply congressional conditions to your loan. It's not going to be done by the Treasury Department. It's not going to be done by the President of the United States. It's going to be done under our orders from the Federal Reserve. And the loan money won't be deposited into your account without the conditions being fulfilled. And if they're not fulfilled, you will be taxed to reclaim the money that you received from the loan. That is what we need to do, folks, because that slush fund is a travesty. It cannot be allowed to stand. But first things first, we need to get people the money they need in order to live. And we need to get the hospitals the money they need to perform. And we need to get the small businesses the money they need to survive. The big businesses have to come last, because they have the backing, they have the profits, they have the loan capability to survive anyway while they're waiting for everybody else. And by the way, the conditions that they get on their loans should bar any mergers and acquisitions for a period of time, so that they cannot buy up distressed small businesses until those small businesses have had a chance to recover. Right now, that slush fund is a cannon aimed at small businesses that will be distressed by the coronavirus emergency. We can't let the big monopolies buy them up. So their credit facilities have to be conditioned on their not buying the small businesses up. There must be no consolidation. We have to look to breaking up the big businesses, not letting them consolidate small businesses. So, that is my sermon for today. I hope I made everything quite clear. I see there are still some of you hanging in. Thank you for that. Okay, I really appreciate it. I'm still here, and I am still willing to consider your comments. So I'll see there are 11 of you here. I'll start to go through your comments, see how many remain interested. Steve DeVore says, my other daughter said people are partying on their boats, making rafts in Jupiter, and the coronavirus is beginning to run rampant through the area. But that's not official. We'll see as the numbers go up. Jim Bird says, Chucky the Shoe, just as bad as the mob. They keep on making each crisis work. Nancy Bellotta says, sometimes I like to call it the Chuck and Nancy show. Sandy says, worse than the mob. They kill more people. They do than the mob. But it's not so personal, right? It's not so personal. Kay says, Stephen DeVore, my Amber told me that the Surgeon General of Florida sent out an order today saying, all people 65 and over and those who are sick or immune suppressed are ordered to stay at home. Came as an alert over her phone today. She has other health issues, so that means her. She isn't sure She can go back to work now. SMH, no end to this mess. Sandy says, that crew needs to go. And Lana says, true. At least the mob only usually kills one at a time. Sandy says, mass murdering. Russ says, better late than never. Steve DeVore says, but what about when people visit their parents and grandparents in their home? That's not enough right now. You ought to go all the way, but doing it like that is still putting everyone in danger. At least for the next 2 weeks. Yes, Kay, it is. We are not going to see our grandchildren, okay, until the antivirals are here, okay, at least. First of all, the spread of the virus has to calm down, but really, children are carriers. They are carriers, okay, unless they've had the disease, okay, and they have antibodies. They are carriers. So until such time as it's safe, we're not going to see our grandchildren. It's too dangerous. I'm 81, and Bonnie is 80, going on 81. The fatality rate for people over our age, or our age and over, internationally, is 13.6% at this point. 13.6%. So it's roughly 1 out of every 7 older people. Those odds are too high for me. I'm not willing to take that chance. I think I still got a lot of years left. And Lana says, yay, Stephanie Kelton. Sandy says, yay, Stephanie. Yeah, yay, Stephanie. Kay says, there is a reason that it's called Florida, SMH. Kay says, Kelton has been interviewed by many places this last week or so. Yeah, she is the face of modern money theory. Deborah says, listen to Steph with Michael Moore on Rumble this last week. Yes, I did. That was a great performance. Deborah says, amen, AOC. Teresa Sanders says, mint the coin. Indeed. Oh, by the way, hashtag mint the coin was authored by Stephanie. She was the first one to use that hashtag that went viral. Kay says, I'm hearing thunder and seeing lightning here in Northeast Ohio yet again, SMH. No end to it here lately, so sick of it. Teresa Sanders says, I think people will take to the streets before that. Hi, Teresa. It's dangerous to take to the streets. Not just because of the cops right now. Teresa says, hi, Sandy. Has anyone else had Rohan on talking about mint the coin? Bill, besides status quo? Status coup. Status coup. Teresa says, I have been a bit out of the loop. No, I think it only has been Jordan, who has had him on. By the way, don't forget, I'm the guy who wrote the book on the platinum coin. I wrote the damn book. Literally. Go to josephmfirestone.com. You'll find the book. Fix the Debt Without Breaking America there. That book is all about platinum coin seniorage. And Steve says, I think that Real Progressives has interviewed him. Yeah, probably. Steve Grumbine does so frequently. Yeah, I'm going to put the links in the description after I get through. And Joey Richard says, it's all right, Mr. Firestone, very informative. Kay says, well, I'm a tired old bag, so I'm out here for tonight. Have a peaceful night. We'll talk soon. Thank you all for the great discussion. Steve DeVore says Trump only cares for himself. Sandy Deck says, I don't think he can care. He's a sociopath. He's not wired to care. It's all about himself. Sandy Degg says, great minds think alike, Steve DeVore. And Steve DeVore says, they just said in New York City more people died from the coronavirus than they did from murders last year. Russ says, gotta call it a night. Good night, Russ. Thanks for staying so long. You must have liked it. Sandy says, it's bad. It's bad in North Jersey. I fear for my daughter and her husband. Yeah, I'm sure it is bad in North Jersey. And in Middle Jersey, too. And probably in southern Jersey also, because I'm not sure Philadelphia is doing so well. Sandy says, have a good night, Russ. And Steve says, I'll call Monday to repeal the slush fund. And Sandy says, I agree they should have loans, okay, not a handout. Sandy, that slush fund is a slush fund for loans. The handout is to the Federal Reserve, so it doesn't get any losses on its balance sheet. It figures 10% is probably enough to cover the losses from the bad bets the corporates are going to make. Deborah Wilson says, you're spot on, my friend. I don't know who was spot on, but probably Joey Reichard. Dale Weaver is joined. Jean Marie is joined. Susan Eldred says good night. And Bonnie says we can use FaceTime for visiting our grandkids, and that's the way it'll have to be. And Sandy says we had kids at school with really bad coughing. Earlier in the school year, they could have had it. When? Because they probably couldn't have had it until the beginning of February at least. And Teresa Sanders says, if corporations are people, then they should get $1,200 apiece too. And that's all they should get, right? Only $1,200 apiece. I think the bill is clear, is that, okay, it's individuals who get the $1,200. Last time I looked, a corporation might be a person, but it wasn't, okay, an individual. Sandy says, thank you for writing the book. Okay, but Gina Marie says, I will look for the book. It's scary how much you don't learn in school. Thank you, Gina Marie. And Deborah Wilson says, you, Joe. Sandy says, that's about the right time frame, Joe. Uh-oh, that's scary. Okay, I guess I've gone through your comments. What I'm going to do now before I leave is I'm going to edit the stream and put all the links in the description so that I know for some reason my edit did not work, probably because I'm live right now. I don't know why. So anyway, I will edit. For some reason, my edit did not work, probably because I'm live right now. I don't know why. Anyway, I'll certainly be able to edit it when I end the stream, so okay, immediately upon ending the stream, I will do the edit and I will add all the links that I've used for this stream. So thank you all for coming. I see there are still 12 of you here. Thank you for hanging in. And good night. And have a wonderful night. I'll be off tomorrow. I'll be back on Monday night. And I hope to see you all then. Multiplied. Oh, and by the way, don't forget on my Patreon account, www.patreon.com/Joe_Firestone. Every once in a while, I'd love to see a little bit of action there. So good night, and have a very nice day tomorrow.